The first thing I noticed wasn't the pain, because there wasn't any. It was the silence. It was a Sunday afternoon in Naperville. My house was quiet. It's been quiet for a long time, ever since my husband, Gerald, passed, but usually it's a peaceful kind of silence. I keep things tidy. I have my routine. I make my tea at 2 o'clock, and I sit in the sunroom, watching the snow dust the hedges. I pay a landscaper too much money to trim. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing out my favorite ceramic mug, the blue one with the chipped rim that Willie gave me for Mother's Day 20 years ago. I reached for the drying rack with my left hand, but my hand didn't go where I told it to. It just dropped. The mug slipped from my fingers. It hit the granite countertop with a sickening crack before shattering on the floor. I stared at the shards of blue ceramic near my slippers. Clumsy, I thought. Jocelyn, you are getting clumsy. I tried to bend down to pick up the pieces. That's when the room tilted. It wasn't a spin exactly. It was more like the floor suddenly slanted to the left, like the house was sinking. I grabbed the edge of the counter with my right hand to steady myself, my knuckles turning white. Okay, I whispered. Just a dizzy spell. You didn't eat enough lunch. But when I tried to speak, the words felt thick in my mouth, like my tongue had swollen up 2 sizes too big. It came out more like, okay, should see why. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I tried to lift my left arm again. It hung at my side, heavy as if it belonged to a mannequin and not to me. I pinched my thigh with my right hand. I could feel the pinch, but it felt distant, muffled, like I was wearing a thick wool coat. I knew what this was. I had seen the pamphlets at the senior center. I had read the articles in my health magazines. Stroke, or maybe a mini stroke. My first instinct, the logical one, was to reach for the phone on the wall and dial 911. My hand hovered over the receiver. But then I stopped. I looked out the kitchen window. The street was still. If I called 911, the sirens would come screaming down the block. The lights would flash red and white, bouncing off the windows of the neighbors' houses. Mrs. Higgins, next door, would come out in her robe. The young couple across the street would pause their driveway shoveling to stare. I imagined the paramedics storming in, the stretcher, the noise. I imagined the whispers at the grocery store next week. Did you hear about Jocelyn? They took her out on a gurney. She can't live alone anymore. It's the beginning of the end. I couldn't bear it. I have always been the strong one. I raised Willie on my own after Gerald got sick. I managed the finances. I kept this big house running spotless. I wasn't a damsel in distress. I wasn't an invalid. I just need a ride. I told myself, trying to calm the racing of my heart. I just need to get to the urgent care or the ER quietly. No sirens. No fuss. I picked up the phone. It took me 3 tries to unlock the screen because my fingers were trembling so badly. I scrolled to Willie. He was my son, my only child. We used to be close back when he was small and needed me to tie his shoes or help him with his math homework. Things were different now. He had Shelley. He had his career. He had a life that didn't seem to have much room for a 68-year-old widow who moved a little slower than she used to. But he was my son. If you can't call your son when you can't feel the left side of your body, who can you call? The phone rang and rang and rang. Please pick up, I prayed. Please, Willie. Hello. His voice was loud, competing with the clatter of silverware and the buzz of a crowd in the background. He sounded annoyed, like I had interrupted something important. Willie, I said. I had to concentrate hard to form the name. It came out slightly slurred. Willie, it's Mom. Mom? I can barely hear you. Look, we're at brunch with the Millers. It's loud. Is this important? Can I call you back in an hour? An hour. In an hour, I might be dead on my kitchen floor. No, I forced the word out. No, Willie, I need help. The line went quiet for a second, save for the background laughter of strangers. Help with what? The Wi-Fi again. I told you, just unplug the router and count to 10. Not the Wi-Fi, I whispered, leaning heavily against the counter because my knees were starting to buckle. I dropped my cup. My arm, it won't move right. My face feels funny. I heard a heavy sigh on the other end. It was a long, exasperated exhale, the sound a teenager makes when you ask them to take out the trash. It cut me deeper than the fear of the stroke. Mom, are you serious? He asked. Right now? You're having a health thing right now. I think. I need a doctor. I said. I didn't want sirens. The neighbors. Okay, he snapped, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, probably so the Millers wouldn't hear him being rude to his mother. Look, Shelley, and I have that promotion dinner tonight. This is really not great timing, Mom. Really not great. I gripped the phone tighter. Tears pricked at my eyes, hot and humiliating. I was scared I was dying, and he was worried about a dinner reservation. I'm sorry. I found myself apologizing. I was having a medical emergency, and I was apologizing to him. I can't drive. Fine, Willie said. We're paying the check now. We were going to go to the mall, but I guess we can swing by. But listen, Mom, we can't stay long. And we can't get trapped in your driveway with all that snow you haven't shoveled yet. Just be ready outside. He interrupted. Pack a bag, or whatever you need. But be standing on the curb so we don't have to park and come in. It'll save time. We'll take you to the ER on our way back. On the curb? I asked, looking at the snow outside. It was 20 degrees. Yes, on the curb, Mom. We'll be there in 20 minutes. Be ready. The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone slowly. My hand was shaking so violently now that I almost dropped it. Be ready outside, so we don't have to park. I looked around my kitchen. This house was worth $500,000. I had savings accounts. I had insurance. I had spent 40 years caring for that boy, nursing him through fevers, paying for his college, helping him with the down payment on his first house. And now, when my brain was misfiring and my body was failing, I was an errand. I was a disruption to a Sunday brunch. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call him back and yell that I was his mother, not a piece of luggage. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was too scared. And frankly, I was too weak. I shuffled to the coat closet. Every step was a battle. My left leg dragged across the hardwood floor, the slippers scuffing loudly in the quiet house. I grabbed my heavy wool coat, the gray one, and struggled to put it on. Getting my left arm into the sleeve took me nearly 5 minutes. I had to use my right hand to pick up my limp left arm and stuff it into the hole like I was dressing a doll. I was panting by the time the coat was buttoned. Sweat was beading on my forehead despite the chill in the house. I went to the bathroom and grabbed my toothbrush and a comb. I threw them into a canvas tote bag. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My face looked different. The left side of my mouth was drooping just slightly, pulling my expression into a permanent, sad frown. I looked heavy. You look fine. I lied to myself aloud, my voice sounding wet and strange. Pull it together, Jocelyn. Don't let them see you look like a victim. If you look too sick, they'll be angry. That was the thought that broke my heart. I wasn't trying to look good for my own vanity. I was trying to look presentable so my son and his wife wouldn't feel embarrassed by me. I was trying to minimize the burden I had become. I grabbed the bag. I checked my purse to make sure I had my ID and insurance card. I walked to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped out onto the porch. The cold air hit me like a slap. The wind cut right through my wool coat. I shivered, my teeth beginning to chatter immediately. I locked the front door behind me. I couldn't stand on the curb. I didn't trust my legs to hold me up that long on the icy sidewalk. So I leaned against the brick pillar of the porch, clutching my canvas bag to my chest. I watched the street. I waited for the silver SUV. I waited for my son. I stood there for 15 minutes in the freezing cold, my left side numb, my heart breaking, terrified that I was dying, and even more terrified that my own family didn't care. I was just an inconvenience, a sick burden waiting for a ride. I don't know how long I stood there, leaning against the brick pillar of my front porch. It felt like hours, but it was probably only 10 minutes. The cold had seeped through the soles of my boots, numbing my toes. My left hand, the one that wouldn't work, was shoved deep into my coat pocket, a dead weight against my hip. I kept shivering, but I wasn't sure if it was the freezing Illinois wind or the terror radiating from the center of my chest. I kept my eyes glued to the end of the driveway, watching for the familiar silver grille of Willie's SUV. Every time a car passed, my heart would leap, then sink when I realized it wasn't him. I felt exposed. I felt like a child waiting to be picked up from school after everyone else had already gone home. Finally, a large, polished vehicle turned onto the street. It was them. My relief lasted exactly 3 seconds. In my mind, or maybe in the movies I used to watch, this is the part where the son slams the car into park, jumps out while the engine is still running, and sprints up the driveway. He would look panicked. He would wrap his arm around me and help me down the stairs, asking, "Mom, are you okay? I'm here." That didn't happen. Willie pulled the SUV up to the curb, but he didn't pull into the driveway. He left the engine idling. I could see the exhaust puffing white clouds into the gray air. The windows were tinted dark, so I couldn't see their faces, just the vague shapes of my son and his wife sitting in the front seats. The doors didn't open. They were waiting for me to come to them. I stared at the car, disbelief warring with the fog in my brain. They aren't coming up, I realized. He told me to be ready on the curb, and he meant it. I pushed myself off the pillar. My knees felt like water. The walkway down to the street hadn't been salted yet, and there was a thin, treacherous layer of ice glazing the concrete. I took the first step, gripping the railing with my good right hand, so hard my knuckles turned white. My left foot dragged. Scrape, step, scrape, step. I was terrified of falling. If I slipped now, right here in front of them, I didn't even know if they would see me. I imagined myself lying on the ice while they checked their phones, wondering why I was taking so long. It took me an agonizing minute to navigate the 6 stairs and the 20 feet of walkway. When I finally reached the car, I was out of breath. I reached for the handle of the back door with my right hand, trembling, and pulled it open. The blast of heat from the car's interior hit me in the face. It smelled of expensive leather, Willie's spicy cologne, and the vanilla perfume Shelley always wore. It smelled like wealth. It smelled like a world where people didn't have strokes on Sunday afternoons. I climbed in, dragging my heavy canvas bag with me. It was awkward. My left leg wouldn't lift properly, so I had to use my hands to hoist it into the footwell, grunting with the effort. Neither Willie nor Shelley turned around. "Hey, Mom," Willie said, looking at me through the rearview mirror. His eyes didn't look worried. They looked tired. "You made it. Careful with the door. Don't slam it." I collapsed against the leather seat, my chest heaving. "Willie," I managed to say, I don't feel right." Shelley flipped the passenger visor down. She was checking her lipstick in the lighted mirror, pursing her lips, and turning her head from side to side. She didn't look back at me. "You look fine, Jocelyn," she said, her voice breezy and dismissive. Honestly, your color is good. Are you sure you aren't just having one of your panic attacks again? Remember Christmas? You thought you had food poisoning, and it was just heartburn. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that my arm was dead, that my face felt like it was melting, that this wasn't heartburn. But the words were stuck. It was the strangest, most terrifying sensation. I knew what I wanted to say. The sentence was perfect in my head. But when I tried to push it out, my tongue felt like a thick piece of rubber. Not panic, I slurred. Arm. Can't lift. Shelley snapped the visor shut and finally turned around. She scanned me quickly, her eyes landing on my old wool coat and the canvas bag. She didn't look at my drooping face. She looked at her watch. Well, you're talking, so that's good, she said. She turned back to Willie. See? She's talking. If it was a real stroke, she wouldn't be talking, right? I don't know, Shell, Willie said, shifting the car into drive. He pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into traffic. I'm not a doctor. Exactly, Shelley said. And neither is she. Look, the hospitals are a nightmare on weekends. We saw the news last week, remember? 10-hour wait times. It's flu season. If we take her to the ER now, we'll be sitting in a waiting room full of coughing people until midnight. I leaned forward, grabbing the back of Willie's seat with my good hand. Hospital, I forced out. Please. Willie hesitated. I saw him glance at Shelley. For a split second, I thought he would do the right thing. I thought he would remember who I was, his mother, the woman who sat by his bedside when he had pneumonia, the woman who paid for his first car. Babe, Willie said to Shelley, maybe we should just drop her at urgent care, just to be safe. Shelley let out a sharp sigh, the kind that sucked all the air out of the room. Willie, think about this. We have the dinner with the partners at 6 o'clock. This isn't just a dinner, it's the dinner. It's your promotion. If we're late, or if we show up smelling like a hospital, it looks bad. It looks chaotic. She turned slightly, offering a compromise that felt more like a sentence. We're taking you to my daughter's house. Becca is home. You can rest in her guest room. It's quiet. You just need to sleep it off. If you're still feeling weird tomorrow morning, we'll take you to your primary care doctor. No, I tried to say, no now, but the word came out as a moan. No. See, Shelley said, interpreting my struggle as agreement. She's tired. She just needs a nap. Becca has that nice recliner. It's better than a plastic chair in an ER, Jocelyn. We're doing you a favor. Willie nodded, seemingly relieved that his wife had solved the problem of his inconvenient mother. Yeah, that makes sense. Becca's place is on the way. We can drop her off, get changed, and make the reservation. I sat back, stunned. The realization washed over me colder than the wind outside. They weren't taking me to the hospital. They were storing me. They were putting me in a holding pattern because my medical emergency was clashing with their social calendar. My brain was screaming. Fight them. Tell them to stop the car. Call 911 yourself. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket. My fingers were numb. I couldn't feel the buttons. I dropped it. It slid across the floor mat, out of reach. I looked up at the back of Willie's head. He was bobbing slightly to the music on the radio, something upbeat and poppy. He was calm. He wasn't worried about me dying. He was worried about making good time in traffic. My arm, I whispered, tears finally spilling over. Willie, arm. I know, Mom, he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone people use with toddlers. It probably just fell asleep. You pinched a nerve. Just relax. Stress makes it worse. He didn't look at me. He looked at the GPS screen. ETA is 12 minutes. Shell. We're good on time. Perfect, Shelley said, tapping away on her phone. I'll text Becca, and tell her we're dropping off a package. A package. She didn't say dropping off Grandma. She didn't say dropping off Jocelyn. She didn't even realize she had said it. Or maybe she just didn't care. I slumped against the window. The world outside was blurring by. Strip malls, snow-covered lawns, happy families walking their dogs. They were all living their normal Sunday lives, completely unaware that in this luxury car, a woman was being erased. The numbness in my arm was creeping up my shoulder now. My neck felt stiff. I knew, with the clarity that only comes when you have no other choice, that I was on my own. My son wasn't my protector. He was my chauffeur to a place I didn't want to go. I heard a soft click-clack sound. Willie had hit the button on the driver's side door. The locks engaged. I looked at the little lock pin. It was down. I wasn't just a passenger anymore. I was cargo, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. The silence inside the car wasn't quiet. It was heavy. It was filled with the hum of tires on asphalt, the low thrum of the engine, and the terrifying sound of my own breathing, which was getting louder and raspier by the minute. I sat rigid in the back seat. The world outside the tinted windows was just a gray blur of highway dividers and slushy medians. We were moving fast, but to me, everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. The numbness that had started in my left hand was no longer just a tingling sensation. It was a void. It was creeping up my forearm, past my elbow, moving toward my shoulder like a rising tide of cold water. I tried to wiggle my toes in my left boot. Nothing. It felt like my foot had been amputated. I wanted to tell Willie. I wanted to lean forward and say, "It's spreading. It's getting worse." But every time I looked at the back of his head, I stopped. He looked so annoyed. His shoulders were tense, his grip on the steering wheel tight. I knew that look. It was the look he used to get when he was a teenager, and I asked him to clean his room. It was the look that said, "You are bothering me." So I stayed silent. I didn't want to be the bother. I didn't want to be the reason his shoulders were tight. Even as my body was shutting down, the mother in me was still trying to protect her son from stress. It is a hard habit to break, putting your children first, even when they are grown men who won't look you in the eye. My mouth was dry, so dry it felt like it was stuffed with cotton balls. I remembered I had a small water bottle in my canvas bag. I needed a sip, just a small sip to wet my throat, so I could maybe try to speak clearly again. I reached down with my right hand and fished the bottle out. It was a cheap, crinkly plastic bottle I'd grabbed from the pantry. I unscrewed the cap, my good hand shaking. I transferred the bottle to my left hand so I could put the cap in my pocket. It was a mistake. My brain told my left hand to grip the bottle. Hold it, I commanded. Just hold it. But the signal never made it. My fingers remained limp, useless curls of flesh. The bottle slipped right through them. It hit the center console first, bouncing off the hard plastic, and then landed upside down on the seat next to me. The water glugged out rapidly, soaking into the beige perforated leather of the seat and splashing onto the expensive floor mats. "No," I gasped, trying to grab it. No. I fumbled for it, but my coordination was gone. I just ended up batting it further away, spreading the puddle. Shelley whipped around in her seat, so fast I thought she'd hurt her neck. Her eyes went wide when she saw the wet spot spreading on the upholstery. "Oh my God," she shrieked. "Willie!" She spilled water all over the seat. Willie looked in the rearview mirror, his eyes narrowing. "What? Seriously? It's soaking in." Shelley unbuckled her seatbelt and reached back, snatching the empty bottle from the floor. She threw it into the front passenger footwell with a clatter. Then she started aggressively dabbing at the leather with a napkin she pulled from the glove box. "Great. Just great. This is Italian leather, Jocelyn. You can't just let water sit on it. It warps the texture. I slipped. I tried to explain. My voice was barely a whisper. Hand weak. If you can't hold a bottle, don't try to drink in the car. Shelley snapped, not looking at me, her eyes fixed on the water stain. We just got this detail done. This is unbelievable. She turned back to the front, tossing the wet napkin down. It's going to smell like mildew if we don't dry it out properly. We have to valet tonight. Willie. It's going to look trashy. It's fine, babe. We'll blast the heat, Willie said, though his voice was tight. He glared at me in the mirror again. Mom, please. Just sit still. Don't touch anything else until we get there. You're making a mess. I shrank back against the door. Tears burned my eyes, but I blinked them away. I am not making a mess. I wanted to scream. I am having a stroke. But they had already moved on. The crisis of the wet seat was over, and now they needed a distraction. Willie turned up the radio. A classic rock song filled the cabin, loud enough to vibrate the floorboards. It drowned out the sound of my shallow, ragged breathing. So, Shelley said, raising her voice over the guitars. Speaking of Italy, I was looking at that villa in Tuscany again, the one with the vineyard view. Willie's face relaxed instantly. Yeah, the one near Florence. Yes, it's perfect. It's a little over budget, but with your bonus coming in next week, I think we should just book it. We deserve a real break. This year has been so stressful with work. I agree, Willie said, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. The bonus should cover the flights and the villa. We can use the rest for shopping. I want to get a new suit while we're in Milan. I listened to them, stunned. I was sitting 3 feet behind them, losing the ability to feel half my body, and they were planning a European vacation with money I knew Willie didn't fully have yet. They were talking about vineyards and suits. They were talking about the future. I wondered if I would have a future. The unfairness of it hit me harder than the physical symptoms. I had scrimped and saved my whole life. I clipped coupons. I drove the same sedan for 12 years. I paid for Willie's college, so he wouldn't have debt. And now, he was going to blow thousands of dollars on a trip to Italy while refusing to pay for an ambulance ride for his mother. My head started to pound, a sharp, rhythmic thumping behind my eyes. The numbness in my arm was now in my cheek. My left, I felt like it was closing on its own. I needed them to hear me. I needed them to stop the car and look at me. Really look at me. Willie, I said. It came out as a groan. He didn't hear me over the music. I took a deep breath, or as deep as I could manage with my chest feeling like it was wrapped in iron bands. I leaned forward as far as the seatbelt would allow. Willie, I said louder, putting every ounce of my remaining strength into his name. He turned the music down, but he didn't turn it off. What, Mom? We're almost there. Can it wait? I think. I paused, fighting the slur in my speech. I think. I am dying. The words hung in the air. I waited for the brakes to screech. I waited for the panic. Instead, Willie let out a short, incredulous laugh. Oh, come on, Mom, he said, shaking his head. Don't say things like that. You're not dying. You're just worked up. Willie, please, I whispered. Hospital. Now, Mom, stop being dramatic, he said, his voice hard. You do this. You get anxious, and then you catastrophize. Remember when Dad died? You thought you had a heart attack every week for a year. It's psychosomatic. He's right, Jocelyn. Shelley chimed in, looking out the window at the passing houses. You're stressing Willie out. He has a big night tonight. You don't want him to blow his promotion because he's worried about you having a panic attack, do you? Stressing him out. I slumped back against the wet leather. That was it. That was the line. I wasn't a person to them. I was a stressor. I was a problem to be managed, a noise to be quieted. They didn't see my fear. They only saw how it affected their mood. I closed my eyes. I stopped fighting. I realized then that no matter what I said, they wouldn't hear me. They had already decided what was happening. Mom is crazy. Mom is old. Mom is ruining our Sunday. The car began to slow down. Here we are, Willie said cheerfully, as if he hadn't just told his dying mother to shut up. Becca's place. I opened my heavy eyes. I expected to see the red sign of an emergency room. I prayed for it. But outside the window, there were no doctors. There were no ambulances. Just a quiet suburban street lined with bare trees and parked cars. We pulled up to a small, blue house with a tricycle in the driveway. The car stopped. Willie put it in park and unlocked the doors. "Okay, Mom," he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Let's get you inside so you can sleep this off." I looked at the house. It looked miles away. I knew I couldn't walk that far, and I knew with a terrifying certainty that if I went into that house and went to sleep, I might never wake up. But they were already opening the doors, the cold air rushing in to replace the warmth. They were coming to get me, not to save me, but to hide me away. The car rolled to a stop, but the engine didn't cut off. That was the first sign that they weren't planning to walk me to the door. I looked out the window at my granddaughter Becca's house. It was a cute little bungalow, the kind young couples buy when they are just starting out. But there were no lights on. The driveway was empty. The blinds were drawn tight. It had that hollow, vacant look a house gets when no one is home. "She's not here." I mumbled, the words feeling heavy and thick on my tongue. My panic, which had been a sharp spike earlier, was now a dull, throbbing ache in the pit of my stomach. "Willie, no car." "She's on her way, Mom," Willie said, unbuckling his seatbelt but making no move to open his door. "She texted Shelley. She's 5 minutes out. Just wait on the porch. You have a key, right? You always have a key." I did have a key. It was buried somewhere in the bottom of my canvas bag, under the toothbrush and the extra socks. But my hands were useless. One was trembling uncontrollably, and the other was dead weight. How was I supposed to find a key? How was I supposed to unlock a door? "Can't find," I whispered. "Hands don't work." Willie sighed, that same heavy, irritated exhale that had become the soundtrack of my afternoon. "Fine. I'll get you out, but you have to wait on the porch. We are literally going to lose our table if we don't leave right now." He opened his door and stepped out into the cold. A gust of freezing wind swirled into the back seat, biting at my exposed neck. I shivered violently. My body was in shock, confused by the mix of medical trauma and the sheer emotional brutality of being discarded. Willie opened my door. He didn't offer me his hand. He didn't lean in to help me pivot my legs. He just stood there, holding the door open, tapping his dress shoe on the asphalt. "Come on, Mom. Let's go. Up and at M." I tried. God knows I tried. I planted my right foot on the floor mat and pushed, but my left side was just gone. It was like trying to move a sandbag. I grunted with the effort, dragging my left leg across the leather seat. "Watch the seat," Shelley called out from the front passenger seat. She hadn't even turned around. She was checking her hair in the visor mirror again. "You're scuffing the door panel with your boot." "I can't," I gasped, tears finally spilling over. "Willie, help me." Willie rolled his eyes, but he finally reached in. He didn't grab me gently. He grabbed my upper arm, right over the wool coat, and pulled. It wasn't a help, it was a hoist. He yanked me out of the car, like I was a stubborn sack of groceries. My feet hit the pavement hard. My left knee buckled immediately. "Whoa, steady," Willie said, propping me up with a stiff arm. He didn't pull me into a hug. He just kept me from hitting the ground. He marched me 2 steps away from the car, toward the curb, and then he let go. I swayed. The world was tilting again. I grabbed the cold metal of a street sign to keep from falling. Okay, you're good, Willie said, already backing away toward the driver's seat. Just sit on the porch swing until Becca gets here. It's like 10 minutes, tops. I stood there, clutching the signpost, my canvas bag slipping from my shoulder. I looked at him, my son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the man I had been so proud of. He looked at me with absolutely nothing in his eyes. No worry, no love, just calculation. He was calculating the minutes to the restaurant. Willie, I pleaded, my voice breaking. Don't leave. He hesitated. For a second, his hand hovered over the door handle. Then, the passenger window rolled down. Shelley leaned across the center console. Her face was perfectly made up, her lipstick flawless, her expression twisted into a mask of pure annoyance. She didn't look at my terror. She looked at me like I was a beggar harassing them for change. Jocelyn, honestly, she said, her voice loud enough to cut through the quiet neighborhood air. Stop making him feel guilty. We have lives too. She paused, and then she delivered the words that would ring in my ears for the rest of my life. Next time, she practically shouted, call an ambulance, not us. We aren't a taxi service for sick people. The cruelty of it took my breath away. It hit me harder than the stroke. Taxi service. That's all I was to them. A non-paying customer who had soiled their seat and made them late. Shelley, Willie murmured, looking around nervously. Well, it's true, she snapped at him. Get in the car, Willie. We are leaving. Willie got in. The slam of the car door was final. It echoed off the houses. I stood frozen on the curb. I couldn't move toward the house. The distance to the porch, maybe 30 feet, looked like a marathon I couldn't run. Across the street, I saw movement. Mrs. Higgins lives directly across from Becca. She's a sharp woman, 70 years old, the kind who knows everyone's business, but usually keeps to herself. She was out on her front walk, bundled in a thick parka, knocking snow off her winter boxwood planters with a broom. She had stopped sweeping. She was staring right at me. She had heard it. She had heard Shelley screaming about the taxi service. She had seen my son dump me on the curb like unwanted furniture. Our eyes met. I wanted to die. I didn't want her pity. I didn't want anyone to see the shame of this. I felt naked, exposed, stripped of every ounce of dignity I had spent 68 years building. I was the woman whose children didn't love her. And now, the whole neighborhood knew. Mrs. Higgins dropped her broom. She started walking toward the street, her face contorted in alarm. Jocelyn, she called out. Is that you? I tried to answer her. I tried to say, I'm fine, go back inside. But my body had finally had enough. The taillights of Willie's silver SUV flared bright red as he hit the brakes at the stop sign at the end of the block. And then they turned right and disappeared. They were gone. The emotional adrenaline that had been keeping me upright vanished with the car. The numbness in my leg gave way completely. My hand slipped off the street sign. The sky spun. The gray clouds and the black pavement switched places. I didn't feel the impact when I hit the frozen grass of the curb strip. I just felt the cold wetness against my cheek. I lay there, staring at the empty spot where my son's car had been. My bag had spilled open. My toothbrush was lying in the slush. I couldn't get up. I couldn't call out. I just lay there, a sick burden on the side of the road, waiting for the darkness to come and take me. The ground was freezing. That was the only thing I could feel. The wet, icy slush of the curb strip soaked through my wool coat, instantly chilling me to the bone. I was lying on my side, staring at a patch of dead, brown grass and a discarded candy wrapper. My breath was coming in short, terrified puffs that clouded in the air before my eyes. I couldn't move. It wasn't just the stroke, it was the shock. My mind was stuck on the image of Willie's taillights disappearing around the corner. He had left me. He had actually left me, lying in the snow like a bag of trash he'd tossed out the window. Jocelyn. Oh my God, Jocelyn. The voice was frantic, getting louder with every step. I tried to lift my head, but it felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Mrs. Higgins dropped to her knees beside me. I heard her knees crack against the pavement. She didn't care about the mud or the cold. She didn't care that she was wearing her good gardening parka. Her hands, rough and warm, grabbed my shoulders. Jocelyn, look at me, she commanded. Her voice wasn't soft. It was sharp, urgent. Can you hear me? Yes, I tried to say, but it came out as a slur. Yes. She didn't panic. She didn't wring her hands or ask silly questions like Shelley had. She leaned in close, her eyes scanning my face with a terrifying intensity. Okay, Jocelyn, I need you to do exactly what I say, she said. Smile for me. Show me your teeth. I tried. I told the muscles in my face to pull up, to smile. I felt the right side move, but the left side, nothing. It felt dead. Mrs. Higgins' face went pale, but her jaw set in a hard line. Okay, raise both arms. Reach for the sky. Honey. I lifted my right arm. My left arm stayed in the mud. Okay, she said, her voice trembling just a little now. She pulled her phone out of her pocket, so fast she almost dropped it. She didn't call her daughter. She didn't check a schedule. She punched in 3 numbers. 911, she said into the phone, her voice loud and clear. I have a stroke victim. Female, 68 years old. Conscious but slurring. Facial droop on the left side paralysis. We are at 402 Maple Drive. We need an ambulance now. Not in 5 minutes, now. She looked down at me while she listened to the dispatcher. She took off her own thick scarf and balled it up, gently placing it under my head, so I wasn't lying directly on the frozen ground. Then she unzipped her parka and spread it over me like a blanket. You're going to be okay, she told me, stroking my hair away from my forehead. Her hands were shaking, but her touch was so gentle. I've got you. Help is coming. I looked up at her, a woman I had only ever waved to from across the street, and tears hot enough to burn my skin leaked out of my eyes. My own son wouldn't let me sit on his leather seats because I spilled water. This neighbor was kneeling in the slush, giving me her own coat to keep me warm. The siren was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I had been so afraid of it earlier. I had been so worried about what the neighbors would think. But as the wail of the ambulance grew louder, cutting through the quiet Sunday afternoon, I didn't feel shame. I felt saved. The ambulance screeched to a halt right next to where I lay. 2 paramedics jumped out before the wheels even stopped rolling. They were young men moving with a speed and precision that made my head spin. Ma'am, what's her name? The tall one asked Mrs. Higgins as he knelt beside me. Jocelyn. She's my neighbor. Jocelyn, I'm Mark, the paramedic said. He didn't look at me with disgust. He didn't look at me like I was a burden. He looked at me like I was the most important person in the world right now. Can you squeeze my hand? I squeezed with my right hand. Good. We're going to get you out of here. They worked together to lift me onto the stretcher. It was smooth, effortless. Unlike Willie, who had dragged me out of his car, they supported my head, my legs, my weak side. They strapped me in securely. I'm going to ride with her. Mrs. Higgins shouted. Family only, ma'am. I'm sorry. Mark said as they loaded me into the back. I'm her sister. Mrs. Higgins lied without blinking an eye. I'm coming. Mark looked at her, then at me. He nodded. Get in. The doors slammed shut, sealing out the cold and the cruel memory of Willie's departure. Inside, it was bright and warm. Mark started hooking me up to monitors. Beep, beep, beep. The rhythm of my heart filled the small space. My left hand was bouncing on the edge of the stretcher as the ambulance sped over a pothole. I couldn't control it. Mark noticed. He didn't tell me to stop moving. He didn't turn up the radio to ignore me. He reached out and took my limp hand in his. His grip was firm and grounding. You're safe now, ma'am, he said, looking right into my eyes. We've got you. We're 5 minutes from the stroke center. Just breathe. He held my hand the entire way. A stranger, a boy young enough to be my grandson, held my hand because he knew I was scared. When we arrived at the hospital, it was a blur of bright lights and shouting voices. Stroke protocol. Room 3. CT scan clear. They moved me from the stretcher to a hospital bed. Doctors and nurses swarmed around me, sticking IVs in my arm, shining lights in my eyes. It was chaotic, but it was a controlled chaos. Everyone was fighting for me. An hour later, the dust had settled. I had been given a clot-busting drug. The sensation was slowly, painfully starting to return to my fingers. A prickly heat like pins and needles was waking up my left side. A doctor with graying hair and kind eyes stood at the foot of my bed. He was looking at my chart, shaking his head. Mrs. McGee, he said, you are an incredibly lucky woman. He pulled up a stool and sat down. You had a significant blockage. If you had waited, if you had gone inside and taken a nap like you said your family suggested. He trailed off, looking grim. What? I whispered. My speech was better now, less slurry. Time is brain, Jocelyn. He said seriously. Every minute a stroke goes untreated, millions of brain cells die. If that neighbor hadn't called 911 when she did, if you had waited another hour, the paralysis would have been permanent. You likely would have lost the ability to speak or walk for the rest of your life. Or worse. The room went silent. The beep of the monitor seemed to get louder. Permanent. If I had listened to Shelley, if I had sat in that recliner at Becca's house to sleep it off so they could make their dinner reservation, I would be an invalid right now. I would be trapped in my own body forever. They didn't just hurt my feelings. They risked my life. I looked at the white ceiling tiles. I thought about Willie worrying about his Italian leather. I thought about Shelley checking her lipstick while I was losing my ability to move. They knew something was wrong. They saw me drop the cup. They saw me dragging my leg. And they chose the promotion. They chose the dinner. A coldness settled in my chest that had nothing to do with the winter outside. It wasn't sadness anymore. Sadness is soft. It weeps. This was hard. This was jagged. It was anger. My purse was sitting on the bedside table where Mrs. Higgins had left it before she went to the cafeteria to get coffee. My phone buzzed against the hard plastic surface. I reached for it with my right hand. The movement was steady now. There was a text message on the screen. It was from Willie. Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Hope the nap is helping. Let us know when you're feeling better. Enjoy the quiet time. I stared at the words. Hope the nap is helping. He thought I was asleep at his niece's house. He thought he had successfully dumped me. He didn't know I was in a hospital bed with tubes in my arms. He didn't know I had almost died. And the worst part, the text wasn't even asking if I was okay. It was a command. Let us know when you're better. Don't bother us until you are fixed. Enjoy the quiet time. I looked at the reply button. My thumb hovered over it. I could type it all out. I could tell him I was in the hospital. I could tell him the doctor said he almost killed me. I could scream at him through the screen. But then I remembered Shelley's voice. Next time, call an ambulance, not us. They didn't want to be involved. They wanted me to be quiet. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. You want quiet? I'll give you quiet. I didn't type a response. I didn't call. I pressed the power button on the side of the phone and held it down until the screen went black. I placed the phone face down on the table. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to report back to my son. I was going to recover. I was going to survive. And he wasn't going to know a damn thing about it. 2 weeks. That's how long I had been in the rehab wing of the hospital. 2 weeks of physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech exercises. The first few days were hard. My left leg felt like a log I was dragging around, and my words still tripped over each other if I got tired. But I was stubborn. The physical therapists called me their star pupil because I never said no to an exercise. I squeezed the rubber ball until my hand cramped. I walked the hallway rails until my sweat soaked through my gown. I was motivated by something stronger than the desire to walk. I was motivated by silence. I still hadn't called Willie, and he hadn't called the hospitals. He had sent a few more texts to my phone, which I kept turned off in the drawer, probably assuming I was still resting at Becca's or that I had gone home and was sulking. He didn't know I was learning how to hold a fork again. Mrs. Higgins, her name is Martha, she told me on the second day, came every single afternoon. She brought me fresh clothes from my house, using the spare key I gave her. She brought me gossip from the neighborhood. She brought me crossword puzzles. She was the family I apparently didn't have. On a Tuesday afternoon, Martha walked into my room looking different. Usually, she breezed in with a smile and a hello, sunshine. Today, she walked in slowly. She was clutching her purse tight with both hands, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. Martha? I asked, sitting up in the bed. I was wearing my own robe today, a soft blue fleece, one she'd brought me. Is everything okay? Is it the cat? Martha sat down in the plastic visitor chair and sighed. She looked angry. Not at me, but angry for me. It's not the cat, Jocelyn, she said. She reached into her large tote bag and pulled out her phone. I went by your house today to check the mail and water the plants, like you asked. And there was something on the lawn. She tapped her screen and turned the phone toward me. I squinted at the photo. It was a picture of my front yard. The snow was melting, leaving patches of brown grass. But right in the middle, planted firmly near the sidewalk, was a sign. It wasn't a political sign. It wasn't a contractor sign. It was a real estate sign. REIT/Max. And across the top, in bold red letters, coming soon. I stared at the image. The room seemed to tilt again, just for a second. That's my house, I whispered. Why is there a sign on my house? I called the number on the sign, pretending to be a buyer. Martha said, her voice tight. The agent said the listing goes live on Friday. She said the sellers are motivated and looking for a quick cash close. The sellers? I didn't list my house, I said, my voice rising. I'm not selling my house. I live there. I know you do, honey, Martha said gently, but Willie has your power of attorney, doesn't he? For emergencies. A cold pit opened in my stomach. Yes, I had signed it 3 years ago, just after I turned 65. Just in case, Willie had said, if you fall and break a hip, Mom, I need to be able to pay your bills while you're in the hospital. It was for emergencies. It was for my benefit. It wasn't for selling my home while I was recovering from a stroke he didn't even know I was recovering from. Hand me my iPad. I told Martha. My hand was steady. Cold, but steady. I logged into my bank account. I hadn't checked it in 2 weeks because I didn't want to think about bills. I scrolled through the transaction history. Transfer to William McGee, $2,000. Memo, medical expenses. Transfer to William McGee, $1,500. Memo, house maintenance. Transfer to William McGee, $3,000. Memo, caretaker fees. I did the math in my head. He had drained nearly $7,000 in 12 days. Caretaker fees? He hadn't hired a caretaker. He thought I was at Becca's house. Then I saw the pending transaction. It was dated for yesterday. Delta Airlines, $4,200. Italy, I whispered. What was that? Martha asked. Italy, I said louder. They're going to Italy. They're using my money to pay for their vacation. And they're selling my house because they think. I stopped. The realization hit me so hard it knocked the wind out of me. They thought I wasn't coming back. They assumed that the stroke had finished me. Willie probably thought I was drooling in a guest room somewhere, or maybe he thought I would need to go into a state-run nursing home eventually. He was cashing out. He was liquidating the asset before the burden became too expensive. He wasn't just negligent. He was a thief. My son. The boy I bought ice cream for. The man I was so proud of. He was stealing my life out from under me while my back was turned. Jocelyn, Martha touched my arm. What do you want to do? Should I go take the sign down? I looked at the photo of the sign again. Coming soon. No, I said, leave it, leave it. If he thinks I'm helpless, I said, a strange calm settling over me, then let him think I'm helpless. If he thinks he's in charge, let him feel in charge. Just then, Dr. Evans walked in with his clipboard. He looked happy. Good news, Mrs. McGee. Your progress is excellent. We can discharge you as early as Thursday. But we need to discuss the next steps. Given your living situation, living alone in a 2-story house might be risky right now. We have a list of assisted living facilities that... No, I interrupted him. Dr. Evans blinked. Excuse me? No nursing home, I said firmly. I looked at Martha, then back at the doctor. I am perfectly capable, and I have a plan. I looked down at my phone. I didn't open the text app to message Willie. I didn't open the photo gallery to look at pictures of my grandchildren. I opened my contacts and scrolled past Willie until I found the name I needed. Mr. Henderson, estate attorney. I pressed the call button. Dr. Evans, I said, putting the phone to my ear. I have some business to take care of first, and I'm going to need a discharge letter that says I am of sound mind and body. Of course, he said, looking confused. But who are you calling? The line clicked. Henderson Law, how may I direct your call? This is Jocelyn McGee, I said. My voice was strong. It didn't slur. It didn't waver. I need to speak to Mr. Henderson immediately. I need to revoke a power of attorney, and I need to sell a house. Martha's eyes went wide. I wasn't just going to survive this stroke. I was going to teach my son a lesson he would never, ever forget. Put me through, I said. I'll hold. I walked out of the hospital on a Thursday morning. There was no fanfare. There were no balloons or welcome home banners. Willie didn't pick me up. Shelley didn't send a card. To them, I was still just a problem they had paused, a loose end they would tie up after their vacation. Martha picked me up in her sensible sedan. The heater was blasting, and she had a thermos of hot tea waiting for me in the cup holder. Ready to go home, she asked, putting the car in gear. Not home, I corrected her, looking out the window at the passing city. I'm going to the house. But it's not home anymore. It's just a building. When we pulled into my driveway, the first thing I saw was that ugly red coming soon sign. It looked like a scar on my front lawn. It was a symbol of my son's arrogance. He hadn't even waited for a death certificate before he started measuring the drapes. Stop the car, I told Martha. I got out. The air was still cold, but I didn't feel it. I walked right up to that sign. My left leg was a little stiff, but it held my weight. My left hand, the one that had dropped the mug, wrapped around the wooden post. I pulled. The ground was half frozen, so it fought me, but I fought harder. I put my back into it. I put all my anger, all my humiliation, and all my disappointment into that heave. With a sucking sound of mud giving way, the sign ripped out of the earth. I dragged it to the garage and threw it behind the trash cans. That felt good, I said, dusting off my hands. I bet it did, Martha grinned. We went inside. The house smelled stale. It was silent. I didn't sit down. I didn't rest. I went straight to my desk and picked up the phone. I didn't call Willie's discount realtor friend. I called Marcus Thorne. He was the shark of Naperville real estate. He sold the biggest houses in the neighborhood, and he sold them fast. Mrs. McGee, he said, sounding surprised to hear from me. I thought, well, I heard rumors you were downsizing. I am, I said, but not the way my son thinks. I want to sell the house, Marcus, but I don't want showings. I don't want open houses with strangers trampling on my carpets. I want a cash buyer, an investor, and I want to close in 10 days. That will cost you a bit in the final price, Marcus warned. I don't care about squeezing every penny, I told him. I care about speed. I want the money in my account before the first of the month. Marcus made 2 calls. By noon, I had an offer. It was a developer who wanted the land. It was a cash offer, slightly under market value, but it was immediate. I signed the digital paperwork on my iPad right there at the kitchen table. Just like that, the house I had lived in for 40 years was gone. But I wasn't homeless. While the paperwork was processing, Martha drove me to the sanctuary. It was a gated community on the other side of town, the kind of place I used to think was too fancy for me. It had a guard at the gate, a heated pool, a fitness center, and beautiful manicured gardens. I walked into the sales office. I looked at the model unit for a 2-bedroom condo. It was all one level, no stairs to trip on. It had wide doorways, grab bars that looked like designer towel racks, and a panic button in the bathroom that alerted on-site medical staff. It was safe. It was dignified. And it was expensive. I'll take it, I told the sales agent. But I have one very specific question about the bylaws. Of course, she smiled. What is your guest policy? We are very strict, she said. This is a 55-plus community. Guests under the age of 55 are limited to 3 consecutive nights and no more than 14 nights in a calendar year. We value our residents' peace and quiet. I smiled. It was the most beautiful rule I had ever heard. Perfect, I said. That means my son can never move in with me. I bought the condo with the equity from the house. I paid cash. No mortgage. No debt. And because the house sold for so much, I still had a healthy nest egg left over. The next stop was Mr. Henderson's office. This was the hardest part. Not because it was complicated, but because it made it final. Sitting in that leather chair, surrounded by law books, I was acknowledging that my relationship with my son was a business arrangement that had gone bad. I am revoking William McGee's power of attorney effective immediately, I told Mr. Henderson. He abused his access. He used my funds for personal travel while I was hospitalized. Mr. Henderson nodded, typing furiously. We will notify the banks within the hour. His cards will be declined by dinner time. Good, I said. Now the will. Mr. Henderson pulled up my old file. Currently, everything is left to William, with a small trust for the grandchildren. Change it, I said. The grandchildren can keep their trust. It's not their fault their parents are greedy. But I want the bulk of the estate, the remaining cash, the new condo, the insurance policies to go to the St. Jude Stroke Rehabilitation Center. And William, Mr. Henderson asked gently, if you leave him nothing, he can contest the will. He can claim you forgot him or that you weren't of sound mind. I didn't forget him, I said, my voice icy. I want to leave him a specific bequest, so he knows exactly why he lost everything. I leaned forward. Write this down. To my son, William McGee, I leave the sum of $500. This is for the ambulance ride he refused to pay for on the day I suffered my stroke. I hope he uses it to learn that family is not a taxi service. Mr. Henderson stopped typing. He looked at me over his glasses. A small, grim smile touched his lips. That is very clear, Mrs. McGee. It needs to be, I said. The next 3 days were a whirlwind. I hired a private moving company, the kind that packs for you. I sat in a chair and pointed at things. Take that. Trash that. Donate that. I got rid of the big dining table where Willie used to sit and complain about his job. I got rid of the old, heavy curtains. I kept only the things that brought me joy. My books, my photos of Gerald, my comfortable chair, and my blue mug. By Sunday, the house was empty. The echo was strange. My footsteps sounded loud on the hardwood floors. I stood in the living room one last time. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the sheer curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. This room held so many memories. Christmases, birthdays, fights, laughter. I thought I would cry. I thought I would feel a sense of loss. But as I looked around the empty space, I didn't feel sad. I felt light. I felt unburdened. I wasn't the sick old woman waiting on the curb anymore. I wasn't the package being dropped off. I was a woman of means. I was a homeowner. I was independent. I walked to the front door and locked it from the inside. I dropped the keys on the kitchen counter. The new owner, the developer, would bulldoze the place in a week anyway. I walked out to Martha's car, where she was waiting to drive me to my new life. I checked my phone. No texts from Willie. No calls. He was probably in Italy right now, sipping wine, toasting to his upcoming inheritance. He had no idea that while he was eating pasta in Florence, I had just erased his entire future. I got into Martha's car and buckled my seatbelt. Ready? She asked. Drive, I said. I can't wait to see the look on his face when he tries to unlock that door. The house was sold. The money was safe. And I was finally, truly free. It was a Tuesday when Willie and Shelley finally came back. I knew they were coming because my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had received a notification that Willie's credit card had been declined at a duty-free shop in Milan. They had cut their trip short, probably in a panic, realizing the money tap had been turned off. I was sitting on my patio in the new condo, enjoying the morning sun. My new place is beautiful. It overlooks a man-made lake with a fountain. It's quiet here. There are no sirens, no shouting, and definitely no snow to shovel. I was drinking Earl Grey tea from my blue mug, the only thing I really kept from the old life. I imagined the scene happening across town. I didn't need to be there to see it. I knew my son, and I knew his wife. They would have driven straight to the house from the airport, luggage still in the trunk. They probably expected to walk in, find me weak and confused, and then start making calls to list the house for sale. They probably had the contractor on speed dial to come repaint the walls grayish to flip it for a profit. I imagined Willie walking up the front steps, jingling his keys, looking annoyed that he had to deal with his mother after a long flight. He would slide his key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. He would try again. Jiggle it. Pull it out. Blow on it. Shelley would be standing behind him, tapping her foot, saying, God, Willie, she probably changed the locks because she's paranoid. I told you she was losing it. Then, The door would open, but it wouldn't be me. It would be Mr. Kowalski, the site manager for the developer who bought the land. He's a big man, not the type you argue with. He would be holding a clipboard, maybe wearing a hard hat. "Can I help you?" he would ask. "This is my mother's house," Willie would say, trying to sound authoritative. "Who are you?" This property was sold 3 weeks ago. Kowalski would tell them flatly, "We're scheduled for demolition on Monday. You're trespassing." I took a sip of my tea, smiling at the thought of the blood draining from Shelley's face. Sold. The word would hit them like a physical blow. My phone rang about 20 minutes later. It was the gate guard at the sanctuary. "Mrs. McGee," the guard asked, "I have a Mr. William McGee and a Shelley McGee here. They seem highly agitated. They say they are your children." "I have one son," I corrected him calmly. "Let them in, but only for 15 minutes, Jerry. And please keep a patrol car nearby." "Understood, ma'am." 10 minutes later, I heard the heavy footsteps in the hallway. My front door flew open. I had left it unlocked for them. Willie and Shelley stormed in like a hurricane. They looked exhausted. Their vacation tans looked orange under the bright LED lights of my hallway. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw the living room. This wasn't a nursing home. It wasn't a cramped apartment. It was luxury. White marble countertops, floor-to-ceiling windows, high-end furniture. It looked like a resort. "Mom." Willie gasped. He looked around, bewildered. "What is this place? Where is the house?" Shelley didn't look at the decor. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, panicked, and furious. "You sold it," she accused, her voice shrill. "The man at the house said you sold it for cash. How could you do that?" "Hello to you too," I said, setting my tea down on the glass coffee table. "I'm feeling much better. Thank you for asking." "Cut the crap, Jocelyn!" Shelley screamed, stepping forward. Willie tried to grab her arm, but she shook him off. That house was worth $600,000. That was our asset. That was our inheritance. We had plans for that money. There it was. The truth. It hung in the air, ugly and naked. They didn't care that I had survived a stroke. They didn't care that I could walk. They cared that I had spent their payday. Inheritance. I repeated the word, slowly tasting it. "You know, Shelley, inheritance is something you leave behind when you don't need it anymore. But it turns out I do need it." "For what?" Willie stammered. "Mom, this place, the fees here must be astronomical. You're burning through the estate." "I am." I nodded agreeably. "I bought this condo cash. I hired a private chef to deliver meals because my left hand is still a little weak. I have a trainer. I have a cleaner. It's very expensive to live this well. You're being selfish." Shelley yelled, her face turning red. "We have a mortgage. We have credit card debt. You're just throwing it away on this." I stood up. I didn't struggle. I didn't wobble. I stood up straight, smoothing down my cashmere cardigan. I looked Shelley right in the eye. "Selfish?" I asked softly. 2 weeks ago, I was lying on a curb in the snow. I was drooling. I couldn't move. And you told me to call a taxi. The room went silent. Willie looked down at his shoes. He had the decency to look ashamed, at least for a second. I didn't want to be a burden. I continued, my voice gaining strength. "That's what you were worried about, right? That I would be a sick burden in your car. Well, I solved the problem. I used the money to ensure I will never, ever be a burden to you again." I walked over to the counter and picked up an envelope. I handed it to Willie. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It's a check," I said, "for $500. $500? Shelley scoffed. "What is that supposed to be? A joke?" "It's for the ambulance," I said, my voice cold as ice. "And it's the last penny you will ever get from me. Mom, You can't be serious, Willie pleaded, stepping toward me. We're family. Family picks you up when you fall, Willie, I said. Family doesn't leave you in the slush because they don't want to get their leather seats wet. I pressed the button on the wall intercom. Jerry, they're leaving now. No, we aren't. Shelley started to scream, but two large security guards were already walking through the open front door. Mr. and Mrs. McGee, the first guard said firmly, "Time to go. This is insane." Shelley shrieked as the guard took her arm. "She's senile. She doesn't know what she's doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, sitting back down in my chair and picking up my tea. "I'm enjoying the quiet time, just like you told me to." Willie looked at me one last time before the guard guided him out. He looked small. He looked like a man who had realized too late that he had thrown away a diamond because he thought it was a rock. "Goodbye, Willie," I said. Then I looked at Shelley, who was fighting the guard's grip. I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. "And Shelley," I said, "if you ever need money in the future, next time, call a bank. Not me." The door clicked shut. The shouting in the hallway faded away. I took a deep breath. The air in the condo smelled like fresh flowers and freedom. I was alone, but for the first time in years, I wasn't lonely. I was safe. I took another sip of tea. It was the best cup I had ever tasted. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.